Let's continue from where we stopped. So we have our three projects, and if you look at our repository here, okay, we have, the CI template that we talked about. Already we have our build job, which is ready. We explained that, that is similar to the build job that we have with the monorepo. And we have our deploy to Kubernetes job also. So, of course, the first thing to do is to build your image, deploy to the container registry, and then you deploy, to your environment. So in this case, it's a Kubernetes cluster that we're deploying to. And then we explain briefly what this script is about. So here, there are certain things that we need, in order to deploy successfully. And one of such things is the kubectl, command. So we have to make that available in our Docker image since we're building using Docker, image. And of course, we've been building with Docker image for a while, so we have to make these available. Okay. And then we talked about the env, which is the environment variable that can help us to do some, variable substitution. All right. So we have to also make sure that that is available in the image that we're using to build our job as well. And of course, we're exporting out some of these, values, which we have to define in our pipeline configuration. And our kubeconfig, we copied that already together in the last video. Okay, that is already available in the GitLab, CI/CD variable section. So that's what we're referencing here. And this script is basically what will execute and deploy the job to Kubernetes, for us. And we explained what this is about. So here we're creating a secret, which Kubernetes is going to use to pull image from the GitLab container registry. Since we're deploying our images to GitLab container registry, Kubernetes needs to be able to communicate with GitLab in order to pull the image and deploy to the cluster. So we're creating, a Docker secret here. And of course, in the last video, I told us that we need to define the username and we also need to define the password. All right. So we need to define those two things. And of course, your namespace must be correct. And I explained to us what the dry run is about, which means the kubectl create is not going to actually create the secret. It is basically going to produce an output in YAML, and that output is going to be executed by the kubectl apply. And we said that the difference between the apply and the create is that the create is actually imperative, which means if something is existing already and you use the create command, it's going to return an error. But when you're using the apply command, which is basically declarative, even if the thing is present, it basically will just skip and not give you, an error. So that is the reason why we are doing a dry run for the kubectl create. And then we're basically telling it with this command to produce a YAML output. And then the kubectl apply will take the YAML output and basically apply whatever it is that has been outputted, for us. And so here again, also we're using the environment variable to substitute. So basically we are, there's going to be a folder in each of the projects. We're going to have a folder called Kubernetes, and we're going to have a deployment, a YAML file, and then we're going to use kubectl apply to basically create the deployment. And the same thing also for the service as well. So now if you go to to each of the folders, I already have the Kubernetes folder created, and inside of that I have the deployment file. And if you look at this, the Kubernetes deployment file, of course the kind is deployment. This is not a Kubernetes class, but I'll try and explain what we have here. And if you look at it here also, we are trying to parameterize as much as we can. So for the metadata, which is information about your deployment, so we're using microservice, which are going to define, the value has to be defined in the pipeline, in order for this variable to be useful. The namespace, of course, is microservice. That's the namespace that we created, remember? And then here we have the spec, which is the selector. The purpose of the spec and the selector basically is to help you to, when you're creating a service, your service needs, a deployment to connect to in order to expose that deployment. So the selector is a way to basically say that this is the identifier, for this particular deployment. So when you're creating a service, you are leveraging that identifier in order for the service to actually know that I am actually connecting to this deployment. So the replica, I mean, the number of ports that you want to create, that's what the replica is about. So in our own case, we want to create 2 replicas. So we have to define that value inside of the pipeline configuration. Okay, and then here we have the specification for the container or for the pod. And so here we say that image pool secret, all right, and then we're using my registry key, which is what we have defined right here. Okay, so we're defined the key right here. So basically what we're saying is that this deployment is going to look for this key, okay, within our Kubernetes environment, because this configuration right here has actually created that key, more like a secret key, all right, and these will leverage, okay, that. So image pool secret is basically to say that, you know what, this is the secret that you're going to use to authenticate with the image registry, okay, in order to pull the image that you want to run in the cluster. And then for the container also, we have the main parameterize that. It's microservice name, the image name, all right. Image name, that should be column tag, all right? So image name column tag, all right? And this should also be a variable, all right? Image name, all right, and then image tag. That should be a variable. So I think that was a mistake there. So I think I've corrected that. So image name and then image tag. So for the service port, which is the container port, so the container port also we're using some variables, all right, for that. So the same thing also with service. So deployment will create the deployment, but in order for us to access, the deployment, you need to create a service. So in Kubernetes, service is a way to expose your deployment, all right, in Kubernetes. So here you have a service. Okay, and then the service type that we're creating is just the normal cluster IP because it's just going to be an internal service. If you want to really expose your services, you can actually use load balancer, you can use an ingress controller, but that is outside of the scope of what we are looking at, all right, today. So we're basically just going to do, we're going to use port forwarding to access the service, all right? So here, the namespace is also microservice. The selector is also microservice. And if you look at the deployment also, you can see that here under selector, we're basically using the same name, okay? Because the selector is basically what helps your service to actually know the deployment that it is connecting to, or the deployment it is exposing, rather, all right? So here, the protocol, the TCP port, the port. So of course, if you've done Docker, or if you followed us, from the beginning of this course, when we're using Docker Compose, you have your host port, you have your container port, all right? So the target port is the port of that deployment. So here in the deployment section, we have the container port, all right? So in the service, the target port is actually the container port, right? And the port that you see here is the service port, which means the service port is acting like your host port now. Okay, so it's acting like the host port and then connecting to the container port. So if you want to access this particular deployment, you will have to go through the service port in order to reach the deployment. That makes sense, right? So you have that. So, and the beauty of what we have done is that it is easy for us to just copy all of these and then paste the same thing for the other project. So for product and for shopping cart, it's basically going to be the same thing actually, and that's why we're using variables for all of this, and we're not hard coding anything. So here in product also I've done the same thing. So for the deployment, I've done the same thing. So I think there's a mistake here. Oops. So this should be right like this. Okay, it's all variable. All right. So it's all variable, and of course, if you look at what you have here, also it's pretty much the same thing, right? And then for the service also, it's also the same thing. So, and that is the beauty of using templates and using variables, all right, for this kind of things. So shopping cart, I'm going to go there. And basically, let's correct this error. All right. And then I'm going to do the same thing here as well. All right. And that's all you have to do. So now we're going to start with the front end. Okay, we're going to start with front end. So let's expand front end and let's look at the pipeline configuration. Now, if you look at the pipeline configuration, it is really very simple. Okay, so we're familiar with these already. We're familiar with the workflow rules. Okay, I mean, if this is the first video you're watching, I'm going to be linking the GitLab series playlist to the video so that you can watch from the beginning and understand what the workflow rule, all right, is about. Now, one thing I want to point your attention to here is this. So we have this include keyword, because if you look at it here, it gives you some description. So it can include item, each item will be a string and all of that. Now, why are we using the include keyword? Because we want to make, all right, our project and our pipeline configuration as light as possible. Okay. Now, if you look at what you have here, we have the include keyword, and then here we're specifying the project. So the project that we want to leverage, okay, just more like when we did the monorepo, that we had to use the extends, okay, to extend a particular job, right? Instead of duplicating the same job, we basically just have just a single job and then we extended the job, right? So here we're using include and we're using what you call template in GitLab CI/CD. So we already have the job, all right, abstracted in the CI template folder, okay, and then we're basically telling our front end application that this is, the template that you're going to use to deploy, all right, the job. So here we have the project, and so the project is CICD poly repo, and that is exactly what we have here. So here is the group name, all right, and then the project is CI template, right? So this is the group, and then this is the template. So inside of that template, we're referencing the main branch, right? And inside of the main branch, there are files that we are connecting to. So the file here is build, the YAML, which is what we have here. And then we have deploy, I think KSA, the YAML, which is also what you have right here. And all the variables that we've defined inside of these deployment is what we have here. So replicas is 2, microservices front-end service port is 3000. So if you look at it here, these are the variables. So microservice, replicas, microservice, all right, replicas and all that. So the image name and the image tag, we have that defined here. All right, so if you look at what you have here, so the image name, all right, is already defined here, and the image tag is already defined right here. So the microservice is what we have defined in the pipeline configuration. All right, the replica has been defined in the pipeline configuration. The kubeconfig, all right, is already available inside of the variable section. So the only thing that we have not added is the GitLab user and the GitLab, all right, password. So let's quickly add that. So I'm going to come here to settings at the group level, go to CICD, all right, so expand the variable section and then add a variable. So here it's going to be a variable. We can do max can eating. You may not necessarily expand. So the key is going to be GitLab underscore user. And so the GitLab user is actually this AWS Cloud Pros at gmail.com, right? So that is basically the user, right? And so the GitLab password is, okay, so let's, so the GitLab password, I'm going to put that also, GitLab underscore password. So we have the GitLab password, we have the GitLab user, and we have the kubeconfig file. So if I come back here, I can see my GitLab underscore user and my GitLab underscore password. All right, I've provided all that information already. So I think with this now, we're good to go. But of course, we're going to start with, the front end. I mean, let's build a front end. Let's see, what we have with that. And don't forget also the CI template. We need to also create a project, right, in that group for the CI template so that, I mean, if you don't create a project for the CI template, where will, how will your front end application, your pipeline, how will it get, all of these paths? Okay, because you're basically saying that you're using this file and the file is inside of the CI template. So that means we have to create a project called CI template that has these files in the repository. So I'm going to do cd into the CI template. All right, let's do git init. All right, initial branch equals to main. I mean, if you look at what we have, we're saying the reference is what is the main branch. So the main branch is where we have the files. right? So you can go back to your group. Okay, so you can click on the group and then we're going to create a new project. So click on new project, create a blank project, and then we're going to basically call the CI-template. Okay, so that's the project. The project is public. We are not initializing any README, and then we will create a project. So the project has been created now. So if you come here, you can also just copy this, all right, and then you can drop it here. Okay, so now we can do git add, right, and then we can do git commit -m. So git add git commit -m. So CI template added, and then we can do git push -u origin is main. Okay, so we're pushing into the main branch then. So now we've pushed into the main branch. So now if we refresh this, right, if you just click here and you refresh, you should have the two files. So the build your YAML and the deploy or K8. So the two files. So now that we are done with all the configuration, so it's time to deploy to the Kubernetes cluster. So I'll see you all right in the next video to do that. Thank you and bye for now.